Why is there such a huge gap between what we think parenting will be and what it actually is?
There's a lot of kind of emotional manipulation we hear about when people are saying that they're unhappy with the dynamic.
What are the jobs of mums and dads now? What's a dad now he's no longer just a provider? What's a mum now that she often is?
Yeah, how burnt out, how despondent, how exhausted so many women are might come as a bit of a shock, maybe, because a lot of the time we're quite good at holding it together because, we're told that we should be doing it all.
Why, when we think having children will bring us closer together, does it so often push us apart?
And it's hard when so many men and boys have had it, just subtly ingrained that it's not their responsibility.
What am I supposed to teach or model for my children when I have no idea what the world is going to look like in 5 years' time? Why did my parents have so much conviction about these things and I have absolutely none? Well, I don't know, but there are some really intelligent people all around the world who've been thinking about this stuff, and they are going to talk to me, and we might not answer all those questions every week, but if we listen to their ideas, maybe we can get some wisdom and some insight, and maybe most importantly, some perspective, and find out what it takes to be a happier parent. Today, I'm talking to the founder of Bridging the Gap, Rowan Whitehead. Bridging the Gap is an online community which Rowan set up to bridge gender gaps in all areas of life, but you won't be surprised to hear that the group is dominated by discussions of the gaps between parents. Men aren't allowed on the group for some very good reasons that Rowan explains, so this was an amazing opportunity for me to understand some of the stories of inequality in the home that emerge on the group. We talk about the expectation on women to be in charge of the home and how that expectation can make it really hard for them to share the load. We talk about the fact that one of the best things that we can do is get mums to go away without the children, and about the thing that I kept doing to sabotage that in my marriage. We come up with some solutions for how we can start to divide time, and also how we can use gratitude in a functional way to make unseen labour seen. The thing I love about Rowan is that she's not suggesting any of this stuff is simple, and she tells us that this is a process of noticing and challenging and rewiring our brains. This conversation reminded me how far we still are from equity in my home and all of the reasons why it's something worth continually working for. I hope you enjoy it. This is a really weird one for me because usually when I'm having conversations with people for the podcast, people have written a book or they're campaigners and I'm really familiar with what it is they do. But you have a Facebook group called Bridging the Gap, and I'm not allowed on it. So maybe we could start and you could tell me what it's about, and then we can talk about why not.
Yeah, so Bridging the Gap is a Facebook group that's all about working on gender equity. So it's trying to work on the kind of the big gaps, as we call them, that still exist between men and women generally in terms of all the unpaid labour that women end up doing, marginalised genders end up doing, in terms of all the mental and emotional labour, and also the career gaps, the safety gaps, medical gaps, all the things in society that even though a lot of people think that we've reached some sort of equality, actually these gaps are still existing everywhere. I started it 5 years ago, and I started it after I had kids. It was a bit of a we're in this place where a lot of us are now brought up being like, women can do everything men can do, we're all very equal now, there's a lot of feminism around in those terms of bringing up strong independent women who can have it all. And then a lot of times once they do have kids and do get into these relationships, a lot of these gaps are still forming, a lot of these roles are still being fallen into. And there was very much, I was hearing the same things from myself and a lot of my friends of these frustrations and these patterns around housework and career and things like that, that just, they weren't, it was like we were moaning about it and talking about it, but it was as if it couldn't be changed. It was very much, this is the way it is in all of the mum Facebook groups I was in. It's just like, oh yeah, that's just how it is. And it's like, well, we have to start working on that now. This is the next thing, that it doesn't have to be like this and it shouldn't be like this, because so many women are getting so burnt out and exhausted and struggling, and we have to start actually challenging it head on and trying to find ways to change it. So I started the group as just a bit more of a maybe an antidote to a lot of the groups that I had joined as a new parent that were just like, oh yeah, men are just big babies, you can't trust them with anything, we're just going to have to do it all. That attitude that I found really, really frustrating. So it's got 80,000, just over 80,000 people now, and it keeps on growing. It's got a big mod team. And yeah, it's really interesting just how many people are facing the same issues, how much it is being talked about now, some little shifts, but how much things do still need to change. And yeah, it's open to marginalised genders, but not to cis men, because it has to seem like a safe space for them to come and be able to rant and moan and tell their stories. And I think, we've done posts asking the group about it. We have thought about it, because obviously men do absolutely need to be involved in these conversations, and we do want to do it with them. But I think at this point where we are, if we had men in there, it would end up then being all about trying to educate and help men, and then maybe some defensiveness and, working on all those ingrained things. And it just wouldn't then become a space that was supportive for the women and for the marginalised genders, which we've seen in other groups that, once that becomes a whole thing, it really changes the dynamic. And it just means that people don't feel as safe sharing their stories, giving their ideas, being vulnerable. So it's something that I think, it would be absolutely great to have one that was everybody. And I do have the public page, which I try and share things and try and get a bit of discussion going, but it's a lot slower to grow. And we do need men to be starting their own groups and having groups maybe that they run, that they admin, that we could come into maybe and share our perspectives. But it would be great if it was coming from dads and coming from men, in terms of having that accountability and that responsibility, because, it's enough. It's already a huge challenge monitoring the group and keeping the group going without adding that extra labour in there as well.
I can really see that in any online group, right? I mean, I get a lot of anger from both sides, depending on whose point of view I'm trying to talk from. And I spend a lot of time trying to see the world through a woman's eyes, a mother's eyes in particular, just because it's much more interesting and helpful for me to be able to do that. But you're always annoying someone. It turning into an online gender war helps no one. With people just writing back and forth with the crying with laughter emoji. Just like, no one's learning anything here. So I completely understand why. Tell me, let's imagine I was allowed on the group, right? What would I learn from it? Let's say I wasn't being defensive. Which some days I can do and some days I can't. But let's say I wasn't being defensive. What would I learn?
I guess I think it would just be very interesting for a lot of men to see exactly how common the issues are, how much, and I think you referenced that before, that it is, a very societal issue. It's not family by family, which sometimes we tend to think it is. I think, so many people are facing those same fights about housework, those same resentments and frustrations in those family dynamics, that it is something that's really, it is a pattern. It is something that a lot of relationships are facing. And then it's something that we all have to try and work together to sort of change on that grassroots level in each relationship, and also on a societal level, because that's where a lot of the issues do come in now, where we haven't got the same parental leave, where so many women are ending up doing the maternal leave, and then you're falling into the patterns there during the maternity leave. How burnt out, how despondent, how exhausted so many women are might come as a bit of a shock, maybe, because a lot of the time we're quite good at holding it together and presenting quite a good face and being like, because, we're told that we should be doing it all. We're told that we should be able to work and do a lot of the housework and do a majority of the raising the kids a lot of the time, that we are just meant to be these superheroes. And we try and show that, because we feel like we're failing if we don't manage to do that all successfully. If we say that we're struggling a lot of the time, it's like we're seen as being weak, and that's where a lot of the problem comes from. So I think it would be great for everyone to sort of see exactly how much people are struggling and how difficult it is to try and carry all of that extra load, and then to try and to see the ways that we might be able to get more equity, to see what people are suggesting, to just, to see how much the bar does need to be raised in terms of where people are at. And, there is a lot of anger, but there is also a lot of thinking about how things can change, but both parties have to be willing to meet into the middle and try and meet the gaps. And that's, one of the hardest bits sometimes, when people are like, I really want to make this work, I really want to fix it, and I want to tell me what to do. And it's like, we can give you some ideas, but if both parties aren't willing to do the work and aren't willing to acknowledge there's a problem, then you're coming up against a wall. You can't really bridge gaps all by yourself. There's certain things you can do in terms of setting boundaries and, advocating for yourself. And that's what I end up spending a lot of time recommending, is like, trying to prioritize ourselves a bit more, trying to put our needs first a bit more and set those boundaries. But you do have to have both partners being willing to put the work in.
I think that's been quite a shock certainly for me and my wife, but also for my mates who are on this journey, that what on the face of it looks like men doing more domestically often requires something really difficult from our mums, which it sounds like it wouldn't be, because it's like they're going to end up doing less. But actually, when you've been told your whole life, directly and indirectly, that you're supposed to be able to do all this stuff, that actually this stuff is your job, that you're the one who's going to be judged if it's gone wrong, like, it's really, really hard to let go and, let men mess it up and learn on the job and all that stuff. And I think my wife is like, she's changed loads. It's not just been about me doing more, and it's been difficult. Change is hard, right?
It is hard. It's absolutely hard. And like you say, it's hard when women have had that pushed on them from such a young age that is their responsibility. And it's hard when so many men and boys have had it, just subtly ingrained that it's not their responsibility, that they don't belong in the kitchen, that, that they don't do the hands-on stuff. And then you do see, even when people start trying, there is that very ingrained, that learned helplessness thing, or if, I'm just not going to be as good at that, or I'm just going to mess it up, so I'm not going to try. You get sometimes the weaponized incompetence of, I just don't think I can do it, so I'm going to do it badly and hope that they take it back over. And, quite often people will, because you end up in that dynamic of, I just want to get it done fast, it just needs to happen, I'm just going to end up doing it. So it takes a lot from both sides, I think, to break some of those cycles, doesn't it?
Let's just talk about that weaponized incompetence piece a bit, because I did a post that was like, guys, sometimes it's just incompetence because we've not done it before. Not all incompetence is weaponized. And it made people very upset, and people got angry with me. People who are usually supporters, like, you can't make light of this stuff. This is often abusive, the way this thing is used. So I just really, the person who introduced me to your group was the author, Melissa Hoggenboom. She was like, oh, I wish you could see it. They have a really hard time there, because sometimes these aren't just about gender gaps. There's a lot of abuse. So when does one slip into the other?
It's such a hard line to... It's not a straight line. It's very, very blurry, and everybody has different opinions on it, which makes it difficult. And that has been one of the hardest things for me as the creator, is that I didn't realize when I started how much posts we get would be about abuse or would be on the line. I was looking at trying to look at the smaller gaps or whatever, and those housework things and stuff, and some of the posts that we get, you're just like, yeah, this is abusive. We need to signpost, because we are not a professional group to support with abuse. We can't give advice that might lead people into more danger, so we have to be very hard on, we're just going to be signposting. It's very tricky, because a lot of people will say that if somebody is having to do all of the housework and having all of that mental load and stuff, the fact that they, a lot of their free time and their energy is being used can be seen as abusive. That is what a lot of people's views are. And other people's views are that it's, a lot more ingrained societal stuff, and that there's more extreme things that are abuse. I think, again, it does come sort of down to the partner's willingness or ability to listen and at least try and take things on board, because if there's a lot of patterns and there's a lot of inequity, but you can feel like the other partner is at least trying to listen and would be willing to try to make some changes and bridge the gaps, then that is one thing. And that's coming down to just gender roles that you've fallen into. When you get posts that are saying, if I can't bring it up because I'm scared my partner's going to get angry about it, or, or I've tried to say this and they've absolutely flipped out, or, or they do the silent treatment. There's a lot of kind of emotional manipulation we hear about when people are saying that they're unhappy with the dynamic. But then you're like, well, if they're not going to meet you with any kind of respect and be like, I care about you, I hear you're unhappy, I want to help change things, you're like, well, how do you bridge that if the other person doesn't want to give up that kind of privilege of having somebody doing it all for them? There's only so much we can say. So it's very tricky.
I'm just thinking about all the times that I did flip out. I mean, not in a terrible, terrifying way, but enormously, enormously defensive to have it listed at me all the things that I wasn't doing, And actually, it really did take the broader scope that this wasn't just about me and my wife, that there was something much bigger going on. And look, we had like so many advantages. We ran a business together, so we weren't having the I make all the money and now you want me to do this argument that's happening for a lot of people. We had help. The economy was great at the time. We had a house with a spare room. We had a live-in nanny. We had family living near us. And still, this was our argument, right? And it's great doing this podcast because now we can sort of talk about it in a less personal, triggered way. But there's a lot of historical pain in it for both of us. And I guess the problem with the reason we have to try and find a way to talk to men about it is men seem to think that this is women's problem, but it's hurting us both. It's like if you are in a relationship and this is going on, you're in pain as the man. Like if it's not coming out directly, it's coming out sideways. You can't live in inequity. You can't.
This is the issue, isn't it, with a lot of the patriarchal things, is that it is hurting both sides, absolutely, in a lot of ways. And there's so much toxic masculinity and so much of that emotional stuff really impacts men. But the dynamic in terms of with the housework thing and the mental load thing and everything is that the men then are in the position of privilege just with that aspect and struggle to lose that, but also are not getting some of the emotional benefits and things that women do have. So it's very separate sides, isn't it, that you're really trying hard to meet into the middle, but it's very hard to see the lived experience of the other person. Really?
Yeah, I mean, obviously that word's come up a few times on the podcast and I haven't really got into it, but it's a tough word, patriarchy, because what we hear is man bad. And, I'm on this really brilliant masculinity discussion group that Ruth Whitman, the author who's been on the show, runs. Really, really great. You can get on it through her Substack. And there's loads of gendered experts on there. And we talk about patriarchy. And then someone always goes, and of course, patriarchy hurts men. And everyone goes, yeah, obviously it hurts men. But it's like, that's not what that word sounds like. And it makes us really defensive. And I think within that is no one likes being told that they're privileged or that they've got an easier time. Like everyone hates that, right?
Yeah, they do. And it's hard because actually, it is the structure, it is the patriarchal structure that we hate. But that structure has put men in privileged positions all throughout history and still now. And so, we are asking men then to try and help break down a system that has put them in positions of power and positions of privilege, which is a hard thing to kind of get their heads round. And it's like needs to come from everybody, but so often it is the people that's in the more oppressed position that end up having to fight for it, and it becomes that battle then, doesn't it, that we don't want it to be that, again, the battle of the genders, but there is those different power structures that we're trying to dismantle.
But maybe if we were to focus on a bit more on some of the things you just said that are more available to women, because they're all interconnected, right? That sort of emotional availability, stronger friendships, lower suicide rates. These are all the bad things that patriarchy is causing for men. The problem with it as a word is, in one sense, you need a word to describe the fact that men hold all the economic and political power in the world, right? You've got to have a word to describe that. But then what the word also tries to do is talk about the fact that masculine things such as aggression, toughness, resilience are more highly prized than things such as nurturing, care, empathy. And it's really hard to have a word that takes on both of those things at the same time. We need new words. I don't know if you and me are going to come up with them, but we need...
It would be good to have different language around it for sure.
Yeah.
And it's very, those things like the more connected friendship, the emotional thing. Again, it is something that sometimes we're expecting women to come up with solutions to, and also men need to be coming up with those things, those conversations, and trying to find more support networks and stuff, as well as that automatic defaulting to women are going to be better at the emotional labour side of it. They can help us to do that. They can, they've got more of that. But actually, it's something that men need to be working on, making those support networks, podcasting, groups, and finding those deeper emotional connections with themselves. It has to be something that does come from men too.
Yeah, and I also think that as fathers, it's an awareness that domestic labour side of things, that feeling of safety that you give your children through those practical things like keeping the house in order and making sure they result in deeper connection, and not just you being this fungi or a walking wallet or the things that dads are allowed to be. But if you want real connection with your kids, if you want them to come to you when they've got a problem, the cost of that is being a lot more involved in the whole domestic sphere.
Absolutely. And it is just something that, I do feel really sad for a lot of dads that don't have that deeper connection and that deeper understanding of what it is to be a parent, because they haven't been there through all of the 10 wake ups in the night sometimes, and the really hard bits of the parentings, the tantrums, and then the good bits as well. If you're not getting that whole picture on a regular basis and getting really involved, you're not going to have that same connection with them when they're adults, and you're not going to have that full experience. And I do, I feel really sorry for dads that aren't getting that. And then I feel really sorry for the mums that are getting too much of it and not getting any break and any support. So they're not really also appreciating it because they're like drowning in it, and if we could just share that more, have more of that co-parenting rather than one default primary parent, then I think, it benefits everybody. It benefits the kids, it benefits the parent, have that wider support network hopefully as well. That would be so much of a nicer way to be creating families. But at the moment, we do, even when people are trying, we are still very much falling into one person being the default primary a lot of the time. It's really hard to change.
Yeah, I mean, just on a sort of practical illustration of what you were saying there, if I'm cooking for my family, that's a really, really lovely thing for me to be able to do. There's a lot of joy and pleasure in it, but not if I've done everything in the domestic stuff all day and the kids. It's great because I've got space to do it and enjoy it. So it's not saying that all this stuff is terrible. It's just terrible when you have to do all of it and no one can see it.
Exactly. When it becomes that obligation and that expectation that every single night you'd be the one planning the food, getting the food, cooking the food, trying to get them to eat the food. It just becomes that huge pressure rather than something that could be, this is a nice thing I'm doing for my family. And you hear so many, people who used to really enjoy cooking that now they absolutely hate it because it has just become their job and their thing that they have to do every single day. And that's, that does take all of the fun out of it if it's just expected and there's not gratitude, there's not recognition, it's just what you do. That's never going to be fun, is it?
I'm interested if the group comes up with solutions to this. I've heard you on another podcast talking about Eve Rodsky and Fair Play, and she's been on this podcast. She's wonderful. But that doesn't work for everyone. I'm just wondering about, but I think what people tend to be in agreement on is that you need systems. You do need systems. You can't just be like, we'll figure it out. I'm just wondering, practical advice is the good stuff that comes up there.
We have some, there isn't as much good practical tips as I would have hoped in the beginning. I think because it is such a complicated issue and a lot of things are so ingrained. And again, you do need both of the parties to be working on it, that a lot of the time it's hard to give good advice that's going to work for everybody. I absolutely do agree that, systems can be really, really useful, and Fair Play has worked for a lot of people. It doesn't sort of tackle some of the underlying things with it, because, it is it's a practical solution that doesn't maybe look at what the programming and the conditioning is and how hard it is to break that. But it's a very good way to show how much one person is doing, how much the other person is doing, and try and redivide it. Gemma Hartley as well has got a really interesting book, Fed Up, that has some good ideas in it. I put together like a kind of basic bridging guide for new members to have a look at that does just break down that you need to identify the invisible labour as much as possible in whatever way that's useful, but all those tiny bits, all that mental load that just ends up happening, you need to get that out into the world, into the other person's brain or consciousness a little bit. And then, you have to look at what areas each of you are going to do, look at how things are divided. I think having check-ins regularly is so important, just whether that's daily or weekly, and then bigger ones. But so that all those little tiny things are always going through the brains, you're at least sharing that with the other person, trying to come up with little solutions together. It's not all in one person's brain to try and sort. Looking at how much downtime each person is getting, because, some people, they obviously will be working more work hours, the other person will be home looking at the kids. You try and want to count that together. That's not free time for a parent if they're at home with young kids. And then you want to look at dividing things outside of those working hours as near 50-50 as possible in whichever way works, so that you are both getting equitable free time. And that can be a really useful way to look at it if you're like, well, I don't know if we're both doing enough of our share of housework because I don't know, we've got other things going on. And it's like, okay, well, is one person getting 2 hours to chill in the evening whereas the other person is not? Is one person getting to go to the gym 3 times a week and the other person is not? Can one person just be like, I'm going to go out and just assume that the primary parent's going to have the kids? Or is it a discussion where you're both like, could I have this time, and then you'll have this time this weekend, Is it working out that you're both getting those opportunities for downtime? I think that's a really useful way to look at it a lot of times. We have something in the group that for smaller things called gap chicken, which is where, somebody will decide just to stop doing a task that they've always done to see if anybody else will pick it up or to see if it's noticed. And that has had some interesting results in different ways, just things like toilet roll things and how long they'll build up, that thing.
I mean, that's taken me straight to my current battle, which is toilet scrubbing. Like, I have 3 kids and I never enter a loo without there being some form of poo in some form there in some way. It's like, I'm trying to I'm like, there's a couple of things. It's one, if you don't do it, you're saying dad's going to do it, right? So I want you to turn around and check. And there's a practical, if you do it straight away, then it's not really a job. Whereas if I come and find it hours later, that's a big job. That's a big job. But I think it's really interesting. How do we make people feel differently about those things, right? Because they obviously don't care. And it's like, am I trying to get them to understand that by not caring, you're saying someone else is going to do it? Or am I trying to get them to understand that this is a good way to live and do it for themselves? And I get quite stuck.
When Eve Rodsky talks about the minimum standard of care that has to be agreed before you divide up chores and things, because, that we have all that stuff about, that women will have higher standards and men just don't care as much. And there's a lot to unpick there in actually, do men just think that women are going to do it to the standard they want, so they don't have to because they think that someone else is going to come up and do it? Do they actually not need it to be as clean and tidy? But, what do you need for a house to run smoothly and hygienically? What are the standards? A lot of the time society has pushed on that thing that it needs to be neat and clean and tidy at all times. So sometimes we are trying to get too high. So I think there needs to, in each family, be that individual discussion and understanding of where do we want to be? What are those minimum standards that we need to try and hit so that, so that we're getting those skills for future generations. They can live on their own in a healthy, happy way, and so that it's not falling on one person that we're trying to meet these standards. It's like, this is what the family agrees. We agree that this should be hoovered this amount of days, the toilet should be scrubbed after this amount of things. And if you can get it so that everybody feels like they are inputting and they've got some ownership, it's more likely to keep on going rather than just being like, I'm saying that you have to do this every time. But it does need to be a standard that that everybody is happy with, and that's where it's takes quite a lot of negotiation, I think, a lot of the time, and discussion to try and work out what those standards are, and that understanding that we all live in a busy time, we all do have struggles. You add in neurodivergence in there, you add in burnout in there, you add in a lot of things. You don't want to then shame people for struggling, but it's about working out, what you want to be aiming for and how you can support each other to do that, rather than it being, I'm just going to leave it all on one person and make it their responsibility and their problem if it doesn't happen.
I mean, this really brings us on to this an article my wife told me she posted on your group, and it's basically, my wife left me because I didn't put the glass in the dishwasher.
Left the dishes by the sink.
The HuffPost, and she said that you said ages ago you put it on the Facebook group, and everyone really liked it because it was a man saying he now understands that by not doing all these things, he just was showing his wife that he didn't love her and he didn't care. And that makes my wife really angry, because she's like, I don't want you to do it for me. I want you to do it because it's the way a house runs, and it's belittling for you to do it because you love me, like it's a favor, because women everywhere are doing this and we shouldn't be. And I really struggle with it, because within what you just said about those standards, some of that is personal, right? Some of that is, I have my own story and my own relationship with mess, and so does my wife. But then within that, I've got this privilege of my whole life, women have tidied up and cleaned up for me, right? And I've got to be aware of that. So then, I just find it really hard, because deep down, I'm like, no, I'm making the room look like this because that's how you want it.
Really hard one to break.
And I love you. And from a selfish point of view, I can't have this row again, and that is all in there.
It's hard. It's really hard to unprogram, I think, because it's been in there for so long, and generational, we've inherited that, and it's all gonna take time but that noticing, that first reaction and then trying to take it away, that's really important. Like, our first reactions are going to be a lot of our conditioning, and then what we do next is where we've done the work. And it just, it comes back to that still very ingrained idea that men are helping, that if they do something, it is helping the partner, it's helping the marginalised gender, because it is their role that we've all been taught and we've all got very ingrained in us. And I think that's where the language has shifted in the last few years. So people now, when they see that article, are like, it's great that he's seeing it and he's understanding it, but he's still skirting on that edge of, I should have been helping more. I could see that she was struggling, I should have been helping and supporting. And that's tricky, because we do, if it's someone we care about, of course, if we see them struggling, we should want to support them and to make things better. But that has that underlying thing of it still being our responsibility and it's still being our job, and you're just helping because they're finding it quite hard right now, with the assumption being that then once they get it under control, it goes back to being the woman's job mostly. And so we really try and change that language whenever anybody does a post or whatever, and it's like, I just want them to help out a bit more, or, they do help if asked, and it's like, okay, but if it's something that is about domestic stuff in a place you both live, or it's about kids that belong to both of you, you want to take that away from helping to the fact that they are doing some of their share. They are doing their share. They are doing the jobs that need to be done. They are contributing to that life that you are building together. And that's not helping you. That's helping everybody. And that's something that should be a shared responsibility. That's where we want to get to, is that it's not that somebody needs to ask because they're struggling, it's that it is automatically more of a shared division, and then hopefully people don't get so much of that struggling point. And there will be times when, one partner's having a worse time and is like, I could do with a bit of extra support, and that's where then maybe it is a bit of helping because you're taking on something more than you would normally doing. But for there not to be that resentment and frustration, there needs to be a base level of shared division to start with, because otherwise it's just not.
Yeah, and actually what I've realised is those negotiations look after themselves if you've got that basic understanding that you talked about. If that's there, routines, rules, how we do things when you've got multiple children. What? like it never lasts more than a week, and all our jobs are so varied. It never looks the same one week as it does to the next, ever.
Yeah, things you have to adapt all the time, in our society especially. It used to be much more things would be the same year on year and you could get that, but now it's very changeable, isn't it?
Yeah, particularly when we're always contactable by the outside world. I think that's a massive difference from the home I grew up in. Like, no one called my house at the weekend. Like, it was like sacred, for work stuff for my parents. It just wasn't done.
It's true, and that's, and we're still now with that, when we're getting so much contact and it adds so much to the mental load, and overwhelmingly that is still falling on the women and the mothers a lot more. Schools are still, contacting us, all the after school clubs, the PTA, all of that stuff, all of that cognitive thinking is still generally falling a lot on women, on top of, the working as well. So that extra contact and all of the extra apps, all of the mental load, it's all just adding to that inequitable division a lot of the time. But because it's a lot more invisible, it's often, it's not noticed in the same way that hoovering and scrubbing toilets might be, because that is easier to see.
Yeah, and I think it's really interesting that the downtime thing that you were talking about, right? It's as a measure that's really good. But even within that, I know that my wife does not shut off in the same way that I do. She doesn't. And I know that because, first thing in the morning, it's like, da-da-da, and we're going here on this time, so I've decided. It's like, oh, wow, you've, been thinking about all this stuff the whole time. And even though we've split the domestic sphere a lot more evenly, I've still ended up with the jobs that involve a lot less cognitive load. I still like laundry and dishwasher. That's just, I do all the school stuff, but I definitely do less. I get less of the planning stuff. And again, there's something in there about the expectation falls on her to get it right rather than me. She's the one who's going to be judged if it goes wrong.
Yeah, exactly. She's the one that's kind of meant to be doing that thing. And it's such a hard one to hand over, because it would take a while to start with, even out of her probably double checking what you're doing, worrying if it has happened exactly how she thinks it should, and all of that stuff would end up being in both brains for a while. And then hopefully, once you'd had some experience with it and taken on some of that, then she might be able to let it go. It's a very, very hard one to make visible, because it is just the brain ticking all the time, isn't it? And it is just that expectation that you're a bit of that cog that's holding everything together. And I just, I would always suggest as much as possible that women get chances to go away and to fully leave, and just leave dads to try and, to muddle through, to get on with it, to do what they can, maybe not in exactly the same ways, and maybe some things get dropped to start with, but to be doing that without the kind of backup of somebody there, unless it's a real emergency, to just be trying to do that by themselves, as much and from as early on as possible, so that, so that women do feel like if they go away on work trips, or if they can go away with friends for a couple of days, they're not panicking about what's going to be the state of the house when they get back to too much of an extent, and they're not having to check up and be like, did so-and-so get to this appointment? Did someone manage to do this? Did they get their medication? That, that they can just go away just for a little while and be something other than a parent. Just, just try and let it all go. And some people do manage to do that, and that's fabulous, but a lot of people don't get to that point, really. They would always feel a lot of worry that it wouldn't go well if they're not there. And I think, that's not something so many dads have. So many dads could just go away for a few days and know that they'll be absolutely fine because they're with their mum.
Yeah, totally. And I think that's something I messed up a lot, actually. Talking about when's your time on your own, sort of did loads of sports stuff, and I was like, I want you to go away, please leave the house, but actually, when she did have an amazing time with the kids, feed the kids, she was never worried about me and the kids. I was really lucky on that. I think because I've worked with children my whole life, there was never that lack of trust that I see a lot of mums having towards dads, which is really hard on men. It really is. But what I wouldn't do is the other domestic stuff that would have been done had she been there. The moving on of the laundry, the dish, that constant. So then she'd come back and be like, it's actually not worth me going away.
If you have to put on so much extra kind of getting things back when you get
Yeah,
back.
because everything's off. And I was really shooting myself in the foot by not doing that stuff, because it's much better when she has that time. It's much better for everyone. And I
Yeah.
just didn't realize how much I was doing to sabotage that. I just wanted to step away from the domestic for a minute, just because at the start you were talking about the medical, the professional. I think, we'll have men listening to this, dads listening to this. So I think it's really interesting to talk about the medical side, because it feels to me like such a clear cut example of a gap. And I was talking to my mate the other day about menopause, which lots of our partners are going through. It's like, it's really mental that the big book about menopause, which is everyone's using to educate themselves, is by Davina McCall. Why is this TV presenter had to write this book? Because there wasn't one. And I'm just wondering if, I think these are really great examples of how the whole of society has been a lot more geared towards men and our bodies and everything. So I'd love to hear from you on that.
Yeah, those gaps are things that I am really kind of interested in and passionate about. And we don't see as much on the group. The personal stuff ends up taking over the personal posts, because that's, what everybody is going through and struggling with on a day-to-day level. And I want to try and get more discussion and more research, and to be able to spend more time on those wider gaps, because we do get posts that are just absolutely outraging. And, like the way that so often women's lived experience is dismissed still because men haven't experienced it, and because a lot of the research has been done by men and designed for men or whatever, that they just then will be like, you must be making more of a fuss about nothing, or, we don't know what's going on, therefore you must be making it up. Through history, all of that thing of it's just been hysteria or anxiety, or it's just because you're overweight. So much of that is still present, where you just hear that, like, women just aren't being heard. They're being really invalidated still, because, there isn't the same amount of research done. There isn't looking into menopause or endometriosis or, postnatal depression. So many things just haven't had that same amount of research as things that affect men as well. And you just end up feeling, completely left out of that discussion and completely left out of the moving forward of medical advances, and feeling even just, feeling safe, because so many people have had to push and fight to get their diagnoses, or had to, go back, because it's not being caught the first time round. They're just not being listened to.
Yeah, and I think in the most people listening to this will have experience of like the deeply patronizing health visitor. The general vibe throughout pregnancy and early is basically that women are making a bit of a fuss. That comes up all the time, and eventually I think you sort of take it on as a partner. It's like, well, everyone is giving you this attitude. Maybe you are banging on about it a bit. It was only when I read Matrescence that I'm like, wow, there's these enormous changes, and we're not focused on the women's bodies at all. We only care about the baby they're making.
It becomes about the baby, doesn't it? It all becomes about the baby, and it's almost like, the birthing person becomes this more just vessel, and then, their side effects and their pain and stuff isn't listened to the same way. And that does just, like you said, that sets you up then for it being all about the baby, and the mum just having to become this selfless person that's at home raising kids or whatever, that just, leads to so many issues later on, doesn't it?
Yeah. And I don't know what to do about that, but I do think it's been great for me to have this concrete example of that happening to my wife, where I can suddenly see it and be like, oh yeah. And again, when she went in about menopause, and this is a female doctor, but it's still this complete dismissive, because that time's never been spent on women.
Because it's just not been thought about in the same way, and because, the kind of misogyny that is still a bit ingrained in that whole healthcare system is going to trickle down to the women as well. They still have those patterns and things because they've entered that system where things like that just aren't thought of as important as, they don't need to be looked at as much. It's only affecting women, so, it's not as big a deal.
Let's talk about the other gaps, the workplace. A really great example my wife told me about was this guy who suddenly He was like, why is everyone being rude to me? Why, like, clients who I could deal with really quickly are now questioning everything I say. And he realized he'd been using a female signature from a shared email. And he was like, wow. And it was this huge moment for him.
Again, when we do get the work-related posts, we do hear a lot about women being more dismissed, women being questioned, being just held to such higher standards in some ways, because it's like we have to try and work harder to earn where we are and to get into the roles that maybe men manage to do a bit more easily, because they're assumed to have that power or that knowledge or that entitlement just comes a bit more naturally because so many men are in those roles already and have had those roles, whereas we feel like we have to prove ourselves a lot more. We feel like we have to do a lot more to get there. And, and there is still so much general sexism in terms of women being labelled bossy rather than men who would be like more assertive and, being seen as just arrogant if we're feeling confident because, in general, marginalised genders aren't supposed to seem too confident and to have too much belief in themselves. We're supposed to be a bit more like shy or meek. And so as when we start to break those, it does make people feel uncomfortable. And you do end up getting some negative feedback on that. And then, and you just look at the wage gaps and you just look at the way that after maternity or whatever, it's so hard to get back to those same opportunities. There's an amazing
Are we not telling our girls, I'm talking about children, exactly the opposite of that? And be a girl boss, nice girls don't get the corner office. Aren't we teaching women to do those things? Or are you saying that's just lip service and we don't actually want it?
Yeah, I think we're trying, and I do think there's been improvements, but we're trying to give our girls so much more confidence and be like, yeah, you can do anything, you can follow your dreams. And I think still in society, then as soon as you get out there, you're like, actually, that's not always the case. It's, we're not backing it up with societal change yet to the extent that we need to be so that they can actually get to where they want to be and be happy in it.
I do think that what seems to be the case from my experience is that maybe it's an illusion that we're equal, but mums and dads aren't. Like we see those roles as very different, and there isn't equity in the expectation on those roles. Has that shifted?
I think there's been a bit of a shift, I'd say, but it's nowhere near where we need. And like I said, a lot of the shift in recent times has been like that we're trying to bring women up to have careers. They have to work economically a lot now, and we're trying to bring them up to think that they can do anything. But it hasn't shifted in terms of then men taking up that domestic slack and taking up that mental slack. That means that actually you've got the balance. So we're trying to tell women that they can have it all and they can do everything, but we haven't managed to shift that domestic side of it. That means that, yeah, that it's going to be a bit more equal. We're just putting a lot more on women in a way. And that's the trouble of then when, we've tried to empower this whole generation to work outside the homes, as people say, and to follow their dreams, to do their stuff. But we haven't managed to empower and engage men to be like, you can be the default parent, you can be the stay-at-home parent, you can drop down to very reduced hours and you can take on this parenting load. We haven't managed to even that out.
I do feel that is changing. I feel there's a difference between when I was, I got a lot of love from the universe for wandering around with three small children, like 8 years ago. And I think particularly off women, right? You get sort of a lot of, that's lovely. And I think that's really dried up. I think it's not a big thing to see a dad out with all the kids doing all that stuff. In quite a short space of time, I think that's changed.
And I do see more dads at school pickups and things now. And there is studies that show in that men are doing something like 2 to 3 times as much time with their kids than they did in previous generations. There is a big shift in how much they're doing, but there's also studies that are still showing, that women are doing still a huge amount more housework, and actually most men think that they're doing a lot more than they actually are, that it's a lot more equitable than it actually is, because they're doing some more and then they think, oh yeah, it's equal now, and they're not taking into account how big the disparity was, maybe. But I think there's a lot more language around it now, and there is a lot more conversation, and we are really trying to raise that bar for dads, as in, yeah, you're just being a parent if you change nappies and you take your kid to the park. That isn't something that's worthy of huge celebration and huge praise. that is what a parent does. I do think that is getting more normalized, which is great. But it's just, we've got a long way to go when you see, and it's hard, obviously, because we see a lot of the extreme cases in the group. So it's hard not to be like, this is all absolutely terrible, because what we're getting is a lot of the, people are coming because they've got issues and struggles. A lot of people who maybe have equitable partnerships aren't going to come and join the group because they don't need it. So we are getting a lot of the worse off scenarios. But there is enough of them to show that it is still a very widespread problem. It is still very, very ingrained.
I am really interested in this idea that basically, praising men for changing nappies and stuff like that, it actually keeps us quite stuck. It keeps the bar low. It's like, I'm smashing it because I'm doing this basic level stuff. But on the other hand, how do you encourage, how do you make it so that this isn't just my job? Like, how do you get someone to do something without kind of praise and encouragement?
There's something that comes up a lot in the group, kind of, wondering how to give that praise and recognition or whatever without keeping it a really low bar. And it is hard, because if you're used to the bare minimum, or used to a lot of people doing the bare minimum because that's a societal thing, you are going to be impressed by some small changes, and then you're like, okay, but they're still doing very much less than me. And it's a tricky one, especially when you want to be praising each other and you want to be supporting each other if you're in a relationship. But you also want to be raising the bar and being like, okay, that's great, you did the dishes once a week, but now let's add some more stuff in there, isn't it? I think you got to really think about it being reciprocal, and think about, would I be praising my partner for this? And, and am I praising my partner?
Yeah,
and
start doing it. If not, don't just think, would I? Actually, no, I'm going to. I think that's really nice.
Absolutely. Because if it's just the person that's still already doing more feeling like they have to praise the person that's doing a bit, that's just going to end up breeding a bit more frustration in the long run. So if that person can think, am I praising my partner as well for doing these things? It's more likely to end up going both ways. It's more likely to end up, you're both feeling a bit appreciated for the stuff you do. And you're hopefully going to notice if one person is still doing way, way more, because you're going to see how much more you're having to try and praise and, appreciate that person. You're like, oh, actually, maybe this needs to be balanced out a little bit more again, because I'm still doing very little compared. So I think if you switch it around in your head a lot and be like, would I be praising this person for doing this? Would I be praising my partner for doing this? Am I praising them for doing it? Then hopefully you can find a place where you're both supporting each other, and you're both trying to thank each other.
I think that's lovely. And I think I've made this point to someone, he's like, but then you're just saying sort of thank you to each other the whole time and it all becomes meaningless. But actually, it's not meaningless, because when I say thank you to you for planning what the kids are going to wear when we go away next weekend, I'm calling out something invisible, right? I'm showing that I can see it. I'm also acknowledging that you don't have to do it, right? By saying thank you. I'm acknowledging that it's something that I could do, but you're doing instead of me.
Yeah.
And I think that's really great advice, actually.
So it's not meaningless if you've got those things in your head while you're saying it. If it's just like, oh yeah, thanks, and you're not really thinking about it, sure, but you're showing that, you are appreciating what they're doing and acknowledging that it was a job that needed to be done, that they've taken on. So I think that's really important. And like, do you follow the man who has it all account? Like, that's a good one, because it just takes things that are said regularly about women and it flips them to men, so you can see how ridiculous it is sometimes.
Right.
In terms of that bare minimum, and in terms of, oh my gosh, this woman, like, cooked dinner once this week, isn't it amazing? It switches your brain a bit into hearing the absurdity of some of the stereotypes that we've fallen into, and like how those gender things are just really damaging for everybody, because it's just, they're really absurd, some of them. They really are. It's like, why would I have ended up just having to do this? But we can break the pattern. If we stop seeing it all as normal, we can break that pattern. But it takes noticing it and challenging it and rewiring our brains. It's a long process.
Yeah. And I really love the way that you're not suggesting it's easy, because it's not. It comes from so many different places that it's really hard to unpick. I guess I just wanted to ask you, finally, As someone who is constantly in conversation with other women about this stuff, is there something you'd like to say to me or to dads, that what can we do to make everyone's life better?
I think, really it's just great to be doing your own research, to be finding accounts to follow, to be, trying to notice everything so that it really doesn't come down to that. Just tell me what I can do to change things, or just tell me what I need to do around the house, which then does still end up with the cognitive labour being on the woman. It's starting to take that initiative, which, it sounds like you've done a lot of work on, but a lot of men and dads will be a bit more like, just tell me what to do and I'll do it. I'll tell me what I need to change and I'll change. And actually, what we want men and stuff to be doing is doing their own research, is starting to notice the gaps for themselves, is hopefully trying to start groups or be more active in parenting groups and changing that narrative themselves. And there are some good men accounts out there to follow now that, that are doing a lot of that labour. So I think it's, it's bringing them up, and it's saying, we are taking this on as a challenge, and we are, we do want equity as well, and we do want these things for our families, and we're going to hopefully work out ways to do it, because, women's already got so much on trying to just survive day to day and try and make the changes from their side. So, we want men to be just trying to step up and just be like, okay, I can see there's an issue. We're going to come up with solutions to fix it,
I'm giggling because there's a part of me that's like, okay, right, so men, what we need to take control.
Yeah.
Let's take the power back. We need to be in charge of this. Men like being in charge. We'll do that. Right?
But also, don't take the power away. Just find your own bits. Yeah. Don't talk over us.
No, I've got it now. Thank you.
Oh, God.
Thank you so much. Thank you. And thanks for the work you've done and for coming on the podcast. And I hope we get to speak again.
Yeah, really absolutely. It's really important. It's just so great to try and have these conversations. And, I really do want to try and build some narrative and some communication between men and partners and things, because that is so, so important. And so, it's really great to do this and to start to give me more to think about as well, and how to think about it from that perspective. It's really, really useful for me.
I hope you enjoyed that episode as much as I did. Rowan's Facebook group is Bridging the Gap. She also has an Instagram page called Bridging Gender Gaps, which is open to everyone. You can find the podcast on Instagram and TikTok at Be a Happier Parent. And you can watch these episodes with video on my YouTube channel at Alex in Dadland. I hope to see you all next week.